Iranian strikes into the Zionist entity. Is this the beginning of World War III? Is this the start of the liberation of Al-Aqsa? Or are there other factors at play here? Recently, Iran launched hundreds of missiles and drones into the Zionist entity in response to an attack on its consulate in Syria. Now, this is important to note. Iran is not acting in defending Gaza here. Iran is not acting in defending the Palestinian cause here. Iran is purely acting in defending its own nation state. This has nothing to do with religion. It is not acting for any Sunni cause, and it is not even acting for any Shi'i cause. It is acting purely in its nationalistic interest. How do we know? Because when 40,000 people were unalived in Gaza, it didn't move an inch. The moment its own consulate is attacked, it launches hundreds of missiles. Number two, this is all a facade. This is all a theatrical play. The response was weak. It is merely to save face. Not only did they launch drones and missiles from Iran, which took hours to get to the Zionist entity, but they notified the US beforehand to tell them, hey, look, by the way, this is what we're going to go ahead and do. This gave the Zionist entity hours to prepare and to intercept and possibly even to counter. They even notified the US and told them, hey, look, by the way, this is in retaliation for what happened to our consulate in Syria. Now remember, back in 2020, a very similar thing happened. The US assassinated Qasem Soleimani, one of Iran's top generals. In response, Iran notified the US that it was going to attack its base in Iraq. And so it launched 12 ballistic missiles on the US base in Iraq. And how many US soldiers did they unalive? 0. None. Because they notified the US in the first place. Once again, it's just a show. It's just a bravado that, yeah, you know what? We were attacked, so we responded. But in fact, the response was weak and it was all staged. This is no different to what happened recently. Number three, and what's interesting to note here, is that Iran has publicly stated that it does not wish to seek escalation after these strikes. And the US has also come out and said that if escalation does occur, it is not looking to support Israel. What this shows us is that the US is really dissatisfied in how the Zionist entity has been conducting this war in Gaza. So it is happy to give Iran the green light to go ahead and strike Israel, allowing it to use Iran to pressure Israel back in line. Which leads me to the next point. Why did Israel decide to attack Iran now? Why has it decided to provoke Iran now? Firstly, to bolster international support. US Senate leader Chuck Schumer has alluded that there needs to be a regime change within Israel if they want to restore peace to the region. The US and Europe have urged Netanyahu not to go ahead with a full-scale invasion of Rafah, but to no avail. Of course, there is still an ongoing huge international uproar against the Zionist entity. And so bearing all this in mind, to try and reverse some of these things, Israel decided to drag Iran into this conflict, knowing that the West will have to support it over Iran, increasing diplomatic relationships once again. Secondly, of course, it allows a deflection and a distraction from the ongoing destruction that is occurring right now in Rafah in Gaza. There are also a few wider results from this. Intentionally or inadvertently, this has reduced pressure on Middle Eastern so-called Muslim governments from seeking some kind of retaliation against Israel. So Muslims view this as a victory, and therefore there's less of an expectation on their own governments for them to retaliate against the Zionist entity. Of course, once again, this has proven that this idea of Sunni governments and Shi'i governments is a complete lie. There is no government in the world today that is acting in accordance with Sunni Islam or with Shi'ism. All nations within the Muslim world today operate under the nation-state model. And these recent events once again have just proven that further. And of course, these sellout rulers have once again been exposed. I mean, when these drones and missiles had been launched from Iran, going over Iraq, over Jordan, towards the Zionist entity, whilst it was over Jordanian airspace, it was none other than the Jordanian regime who decided to come to Israel's help, to come to their rescue, and intercept many of these drones and missiles to save its warm, friendly neighbour. I mean, these are the kind of regimes and governments and tyrants, wallahi, that we have ruling over us. As a conclusion, number one, this was no more than a theatrical display to save face and to quell public opinion in Iran. It did no real damage to the Zionist entity, and it did so all while with the permission of its cha-cha, America. Number two, this is by no means a victory for the Ummah, and this has not helped Gaza at all. This was not done for Gaza in the first place, and Gaza continues to be under an occupation and a bombardment and a destruction. By no way is this a victory for the Muslim Ummah. And finally, events like these only distract us from a true solution. And that can only be a system which is implemented in the Muslim world, which is in line with the Islamic creed of the Muslim people. It is only such a system which would really put the liberation of Palestine at the heart of its priority. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bestow such a system upon us soon.